Okay. Let's see if we can start it, even though we're going to be small and tiny tonight, and everybody seems to be making fairy houses or it's just beginning. The reason why the Fairy Homes and Gardens tour got started was last November. Barbara and I had just finished book number 2. We have the first book over there, and we got it in, and I kept thinking, it's also gloomy. We have this COVID, everybody's so depressed, the world was falling apart, and we weren't seeing anybody. We weren't seeing any of our friends. And one of these days, it was going to get better, and we should do something together that was free and it was fun. And there's your friend, baby. Hi there, Marianne. Come on down here. And we should do something that was fun, that was out in nature, that you could do with COVID, and that it could be fun and just sort of magical, and to bring the magic back into life. So this is what the whole Fairy Homes and Garden Tour is about. It is totally free. People are just going to have fun. They're going to wander from fairy house to fairy house. You probably won't be able to see them all because they're going to go from Church of Our Redeemer at Merriam Street all the way down to Wardoff School. That's a long hike. And people are already sending me pictures and they're putting up other places. But they're so enjoying it. Today, I went around, delivered signs to preschools, and they're all so excited about what they're doing. So this is why we're doing fairy houses. So the beginning, it's the intellectual part is in this book, which is Fairy Homes and Gardens. So let me open my folder and let's get started. Because when Barbara and I dreamed of doing this book, I didn't see it as a how-to book. Instead, we wanted to show you some of the many phenomenal designers in the world. And here's David Rao, who's inspired us a lot. He's down at the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut. We hope that they will inspire you to design your own fairy house and garden. People will tell you that the days of fairies, signs, and omens are long gone, that those things are only to be found in old wives' tales or stories to frighten children. But those stories are what keep us fascinated on hot summer nights when it's too cold, when it's too hot to do anything other than dream. Cold winter nights when you just want to shiver in the dark. Many of these tales are part of our heritage. They are ones we all know that we grew up with. When we were children, we believed in so many things. The fairy godmothers who made us beautiful for the ball, the prince who would come and carry us away, the wicked witch, the 7 dwarfs. And every year, this library does a fairy ball where the kids come all dressed up. We see this house, at least I do, and I immediately think of Hansel and Gretel. It is a perfectly Hansel and Gretel house. You can just see them walking up and knocking on the thing. And this one reminds me of Rapunzel. Notice the dragon's head and tail. Do you remember waiting for the Tooth Fairy or Santa, or when Peter Pan looked at us directly and implored us to save Tinkerbell, save Tinkerbell? Fairies can still be there for us or for our children or our grandchildren. My friend Lynn Jansen, who many of you know, Lynn Jansen, works with her 2 visiting grandsons to build a new fairy house every summer when they visit her in Lexington. And at night, while they were asleep, she goes out and sprinkles sparkles around. Old or young, people still believe in magic and fairies. And though we may scoff, many people report sightings of creatures similar to fairies throughout the world. Barbara, my co-author, insists there's a dancing fairy in the middle of this picture, and she may well be right. If so, her world is all that much richer. I remember you. There. Which to me is extremely important. Designed this quaint woodland gourmet apple shop. Iridescent green rocks pave the entrance. Miniature caramel apples are displayed on a leaf-covered woodland cart outside. A botanical ladder reaches a balcony with a set of table and chairs awaiting the fairies that want more of a scenic view while enjoying their treats. Sparkly interior walls surround a mini wood table displaying more of the delicious looking apples. Do you see the owl on the upper left? I can't quite see the owl, so Yes, we can
We
see
were
it.
there.
It's there, I believe you. Now, I don't expect anybody's fairy house is gonna look like that in Lexington. That is a bit much. But these people do it for money and they have a good time with it. This is a more garden-oriented one, and I've given this lecture many times to many garden clubs. Fairies love small things in pink and purple flowers. So you select the dainty violas, the alyssum, and the blue-flowered lobelia. Dwarf plants and slow-growing plants are useful because they won't quickly overrun your fantasy landscape. We recommend succulent plants like low-growing sedum, ground covers like ajuga, moss, low-growing allium. Miniature Alstroemeria and Lysimachia would also be appropriate. Matter of fact, Wilson's, who's working with us on this, has a whole display of fairy plants, if you want to go look at them. She is really into fairy plants. I hadn't seen as many as she had. Don't forget plants with fairy-like or magical names like epimedium, fairy wings, or disporum, which means fairy bells. I love this house in the woods. When you make your house, you shrink down to the size of a fairy, or at least a small child, and imagine the spaces you would like to inhabit. How would you spend your day and create the objects necessary? Sure, you have wings, but after a long day, you might want the assistance of a tiny ladder, a twisty staircase, or even a rope to help you get from one level to the next. Today, thanks to the creative spirit of artists, designers, grandparents, and children, fairy homes and gardens have become widespread. Perhaps it's because fairies reward those who respect the environment, all gardeners remember that, with good fortune, joy, and happiness. And we all need that these days. Places such as Maine Botanical Gardens, and if you haven't been there, they have a beautiful fairy garden, or the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut hold participatory exhibits. Popular magazines describe how to make fairy log houses or twig chairs for miniature gardens. Do you see the ladder to the left here? Garden shops sell miniature plants and fairy furniture and occasionally present a how to make your own fairy garden seminar. Many are involved in this latest gardening trend. And what can be particularly rewarding is that it seems to be a trend that grandparents and grandchildren enjoy together. Note the tiny table made from a rock under this big root in this participatory exhibit. Looking at the more commercial side, New England Nursery in Bedford has held several fairy garden seminars, as have other nurseries. J. O'Rourke described making a fairy garden to Barbara. She began with a broken pot and recreated the bottom by lining it with a moss mat and saucer. Of course, if you're planting without any drainage, place a thick layer of gravel at the bottom before you add any soil. Then she added sheet moss and potting soil to create the landscape. Mixing a time-released fertilizer into your potting soil will start your plants off right. She secured the stacked pots with bamboo stakes and added soil and packed spaces between the pots with sheet moss to prevent a landslide. You keep the top of the root ball of each plant level with the rest of the soil. And you tamp the soil firmly around and in between the root balls of each plant to keep everything in place. Water several times when you first plant to get the consistent moisture level. You treat it just like any new planting. You can use nail scissors to trim, by the way. Once the garden is saturated, make your design. Scoop out dirt to make pathways and add the rock or pebbles. Jay used polished stone or broken pottery for stepping stones, which provided texture and interest. Different kinds of moss, both natural and preserved, gave her a variety of colors. Plants that stay small are ideal for your fairy garden, but sooner or later you may have to replace them. And voila, look at Jay's final product. Don't be afraid to trim. Some low growers like baby's tears or isotoma can be severely pruned and will bounce back quickly. Of course, some fairy homes are much more elaborate, such as this one. Oh, it's one of my favorites. The front door is constructed with transparent films, which have been printed with images of dragonfly wings. You're frowning over there. You see that? I think that's really lovely. When Barbara and I first considered writing this book, Elaine, you're gonna laugh now. I asked my grandchildren and their friends to come over one hot July day and to build fairy houses. While my neighbors and their children clustered around their air conditioners and computers, I had 4 children, aged 7 and 10, collecting items from the garden and woods to decorate their houses, making mud for their houses, collaborating and cooperating and playing outside. My granddaughter, Chrissy, later said, Libby and I made a mushroom and acorn top sink and used rocks for benches and the table. We thought about the rock benches, decided to cover them with moss. Next, we made the bedroom. We laid down moss for the mattress. Then we put a pillow for the pillow and another for the blanket. We live in Massachusetts, and fairies probably get cold in the wintertime. You see, she was about 10 years old. Notice how detailed she was. She was really thinking about a house that would work for a fairy family. Libby and Chrissy had a wonderful time working out the details of their house, as did the 2 boys. It wasn't just the ability to play in the mud, but the creation that had them all so excited. Lynn and her grandchildren believe that if they build a fairy home and leave it, they might attract a fairy into their domain. When she visits them in their home on Puget Sound, they collect crab shells, seaweed, and driftwood for their house. They then decide what their house would look like. The project takes imagination, decision-making, and building skills, something that all children have and love to use. Think of the popularity of Legos. This is a perfect thing for kids to use that imagination to get it going again, and they're outside. It is not just young children and grandparents who love fairy gardens. As our book indicates, older youth can delight in making their own garden and designing their world. Here, Tegan is laying stepping stones for fairies along the railroad track. Sweet gum balls border the path in the garden. Thomas made a fairy home in the red flyer wagon. Emma is making her fairy home with kernels of Indian corn, crepe myrtle seed pods, and wood slips. These kids are all in Georgia, by the way. That's why the plants are slightly different. Gianna used red bud seed pods, corn kernels, and agapanthus in her fairy home. And Peter made a surfboard with twisted wisteria seed pod and pine bark. One of our designers, Titania Kaitara, points out that making fairy houses is about more than just gluing little pieces of bark together or stacking stones into the semblance of a tiny natural home. She says, it is about tuning in and listening to nature. It is about being open to whatever you might see or feel or think about walking and looking for materials. It doesn't matter where you live. Nature's everywhere, even in the cities. If there's a waterfront area, you could find driftwood or shells or smooth round rocks. In the woods, you might find pine needles, bark, moss, rocks, and lichen. You can look for small leaves. I was looking for stuff for this rock concert that's coming up on Friday, and look at this beautiful piece of bark with a lichen and barks on that. I think that's gorgeous. On the other hand, I'm not an artist and I can't quite figure out what to do with it. It could be the roof or the side. Yeah, we've got to be a little more artistically minded than I am here. For example, woolly thyme will create a gray aromatic foliage. It is also heat and drought resistant. Another possibility is heat tolerant ornamental strawberry with its white blossoms in spring and tiny strawberries in the fall. Or golden divine barberry has fantastic coloring with the pink buds and green leaf combination. What you can make from natural materials is almost as limitless as your imagination, especially if you make it in miniature. I'm going to segue here. One of the things I noticed when taking those 4 kids out and I had them collect their own stuff, they had never really noticed a pine cone before. They had never seen this kind of thing or looked at a milkweed pod, and it was getting them out in nature again, which is something I think we've all learned after these last 2 years. The kids should be outside again. If you like the desert look, plant small succulents, cacti and sedums, but obviously don't add a moisture-loving plant into that mix. Look for plants that can stay small, such as dark eyes cranebills with its delicate long blooming pink flower, baby tears, or tiny slow growing plants, such as the Sherman hinoki cypress or dwarf conifer or the dwarf pagoda Japanese holly. The downside is the natural materials, such as those displayed in this basket, often break down more quickly than those that are manufactured items. So if your fairy house is outside during a harsh winter, it may not last, or the deer may find it, or somebody may decide to take a munch on it. But that provides you with an excuse to build a new one. The fairy houses, they're recyclable. You could just keep going. You can have such fun with fairy houses. Imagine creating this one in your garden. Sally J. Smith at Green Spirit Arts created her autumn flame cottage by stitching sugar maple leaves together with needle and cotton thread to form this freestanding house in situ. Stitching it. That's it. She just sewed it. It's amazing. Here's another from Sally. It won't last long, but just look. She shaped daffodil cottages from living daffodil flowers and leaves in situ. When done, she leaves them for the fairies to enjoy. They won't last long, but my daffodils have lasted for about 2 weeks out there because it's cool. You could do it. One designer cleaned and oven dried a pumpkin shell at a low temperature to create the roof on the simple 5-inch high autumn abode. Flat driftwood creates the floor, which is mounted to a wooden base. The 2 pillars of the house are thick pieces of driftwood branches. Silk flowers, synthetic mushrooms, and fall berries are accents. Now you see, there we're getting into the fake there. A round wooden disc is covered in birch bark. On the table is a wand made from glass beads surrounded by orange gemstones. This fairy house uses a combination of natural and synthetic materials. This designer constructed a butterfly house from a decorative iron bird cage and festooned it with artificial flowers. She used wood, fabric, sticks, wire, crystals, berries, acorns, baskets, polymer clay, which seems a big one, and knickknacks in designing and building furnishings and accessories. The house gets its name from the numerous pink butterflies that flit around the roof, which looks as if it were plucked from an English garden. Are you flitting away there? You flitted? Okay. Some designers, such as this one, make good use of all those trinkets that we stow away because they're so cute. And we're sure they'll find a use to them somewhere. Or it was a gift from so-and-so, and you don't know what to do with it. The garden-themed dining area has a checkered silk tablecloth and 2 flower petal stools. The table is set with silver dollar placemats, an acorn full of sugared fruit, flower petal candlesticks, and a loaf of French bread. Above the table, a ceiling fan made from flower petals keeps a steady breeze blowing. In other words, many designers are eco artists, which is a nice way of saying they transform trash into treasures, mix it with nature, and end up with a magical scene. And you can do that too. Now, of course, you may have to keep replacing those flower petals in the fan because they are going to turn brown on you. But otherwise, it could be kind of fun if you have the time. You might want to build the fairy house in a container garden, which it makes it easier to use. Rosemary adds texture. You can easily prune it into a tree. The pink and green polka dotted plant will attract the more gentle fairies because pink represents kindness, friendship, and love. Be sure to drill a hole for drainage in the container before planting. Fairy houses can be short and fat, tall and skinny, simple or ornate, and so on. Decide which style you like before you start planning your design. You can use a milk carton, a birdhouse, cardboard, wood, or twigs to make the house structure. Straight lines make planning simpler. Start with a focal point center at the back, then fill in the surrounding area with plants on each side. Now you don't have to use plants, by the way. Cheryl Lozier of Summers Past created a whimsical log home with a small pond, a vegetable garden, and animals. Some believe that blue flowers will flourish in your fairy garden as that they portray fantasy and intrigue. When making a pool or body of water, first lay down small white decorative rocks to prevent the soil from seeping up and making the water look muddy. Then add blue glass or gravel. When strolling through a real garden, you generally encounter a number of focal points along the way. Here, the angel and the fence draw the viewer's eye. And here, the animals graze happily here. But as Barbara says, it doesn't look like they're keeping up with the mowing. Architectural features make a strong focal point, as they do in our own garden. As you can see, some of these designers get quite elaborate, but you don't need to do that. Just have fun. This is making a fairy house is all about having fun, enjoying nature. Beach fairies enjoy seaside cottages. Shells, smooth rocks, and sea glass are just the things for making tiny furniture. They are perfect building material. Notice the sea urchin stools, the shell plates, and even the sconces are shells. If you want to keep your fairy house, you might want to have a base to set the house on. You can use many things, an old piece of cardboard, scrap wood, a tree stump, rock, etc. Then decorate it to look like an outdoor setting. Here, the designer used a rock and built the house from driftwood and large seashells. A large scallop shell is the roof. Soft green reindeer moss cascades down the walls and around the corners of the house. She made a little table from a seashell mounted to a piece of coral. The shelf has a glass bottle and another piece of glass. Did you find the pearl? Everybody found the pearl?
Yeah.
Phoebe, you look frowning over
No,
there.
I'm
You can
trying to
see?
see it.
Oh, well, come moving closer,
Yeah.
because this next one is one of my favorites. This one is a ferry boat with, and I've always wanted to do with these, with snakeskin sails. You remember when your kids used to bring you a snakeskin, or you had them and you never knew what to do with it? I kept it for years crumbling on my shelves and stuff. They'll put it in a fairy house. That solves the problem. In this close-up of the bathroom, notice the designer's wonderful use of the mirror, which catches the sun rays and the sway of nearby plants. This one is very simple, but I love it. And add moss to look like grass, twigs to look like miniature trees, and pebbles to look like boulders. While creating, designers often let the materials decide where they want to be and how they want to be combined. Unlike dollhouses, where objects are made to look like tiny versions of the real thing, fairy houses incorporate another level of imagination, transforming natural objects such as this tree stump, along with artificial objects, into new homes for the spirits. I was out in Garfield Woods the other day. There are a lot of tree stumps out there. They're just begging to be turned into fairy houses. You know, you just can almost pick them up and go with them. Fairy house materials are endless. Notice the pot on its side next on the chair. Don't you feel like you just walked in on someone who ran away? Maybe it was a fairy. Now, designers fill their pockets with tiny pine cones, harvest birch bark, dried flower pods, and collect bits of straw. Walking with them is fun because they're always spotting something interesting. This designer found a piece of honeycomb, along with the acorn tops, the pine cones, and the moss. This designer made a two-story house with a chimney capped with, anybody want to tell me what it is?
Onion, garlic.
Garlic, it's a garlic bud. A pink flower is the porch light. And this designer used a base of driftwood, a collection of shells, some painted blue. You can attach your items with fast-acting adhesive glue, which contains cyanoacetate. Cyanoacetate, people always ask me what that is, that withstands watering and hot sun. You can forage for fairy material at tag sales and flea markets. You can use thimbles as vases, fishing flies as flowers, buttons as plates, and even beads as balustrades for balconies. Christmas tree decorations are an easy source of supplies. Nurseries now have items for fairy gardens, ranging from small fairies to red white mushrooms and doors. The kids are really into these painted doors, and I gather you can buy all over the place, though the new store in town has run out of them. Here, the designer used sand dollars for the rugs. Pine cones, acorns, and moss. The materials are endless, and collecting them is half the fun. Acorns can serve as fairy bowls on a table made of bark. The drink umbrellas add a sense of playfulness to the scene. This designer used various mosses and found objects to decorate her house for Halloween. The skull has a candle in it. Whether the material is found in the forest or made in China, the fairy magic is the imagination that goes into building these houses. This fairy house is made from a stump from a dead apple tree. The designer made the windows and doors and hand painted them. She used moss and found objects such as the tiny tea set on the right-hand branch. Now we get into the fairy beds. These are real miniature objects. Fairies have beautiful dreams when they sleep in one of these beds. Turquoise beads add extra shimmer. Fairy beds and fiddlesticks, says Ginger Fuller, one of our designers. Pink is a favorite color always. And notice the rosebud pillows here. An arching canopy adds dreaminess to this bed. And want to know what to do with that peacock feather you saved all these years? Here we have one in a twig settee for the peacock room. Fairy houses can become mansions too. To inspire you, now I'm going to show you something more elaborate designs. Those were the simpler designs from these designers. Now some big elaborate ones. This is Jack's Beanstalk bed and breakfast. It is made in an extra large, dense packing tube that has been lightly textured and painted with multiple shades of green paint. The display includes a fly-in outdoor shower on the left and leafy bunk beds. The oversized deep green leaves that wrap around the structure are perfect to fit the handcrafted flower fairies that are nestled in for a good night's sleep. Nestled in the dry grass overlooking the valley looms a large fairy commune nicknamed Shangri-La. The designer discovered an old saguaro cactus shell, which made a perfect foundation for the commune. She added carved out gourds to create dwellings. See the ladder? In keeping with the communal spirit, this community has common areas connected with oriental carpeted hallways, staircases, and ladders. In this popular nursery, matrons lovingly nurture the fairy children while their parents spend their time working or frolicking. The gourd nursery on the left is where the babies sleep in miniature beds covered in silk. On the right, another gourd provides small rooms with a common gathering place. The south end is where residents meet to hold council and make new friends. Note the leaf design carved around the opening of the entryway gourd. Here is the Fairy Delicious Bakery. The designer used a decorative iron bird cage wrapped in vines of artificial leaves, berries, and pink cherry blossoms mounted onto a round tree stump. As the local fairies know, this is a lovely place to have a cup of tea at one of the tables set with cupcake liner tablecloths. You always wondered what you wanted to do with a cupcake liner. What'd you say over there?
And the school seats.
And then the spool seats. And did you see the spool seats too?
Oh, yeah.
Barbara just pointed them out. I don't think I ever noticed them before. Inside, homemade pastries, pies, cakes, cookies, tarts, and bread are artfully arranged on the counter, baker's cabinet, and the circular shelf that runs along the interior of the roof. Now, a lot of that stuff is made out of polymer clay, which is, as I said, big. And you'll see polymer clay in LexArts stuff often. Polymer clay miniatures, artificial flowers and leaves created the sweets and accessories for serving. This one, I always thought would be great if you were doing a shower. It was inspired by Julia Child. Emily Crooker of Enchanted Gourds designed a fairy kitchen, fully stocked for a gourmet meal. A recipe from the Mastering the Art of French Cooking is written on the exterior. See the left side. The kitchen features a stove with French frank burners. You didn't know what to do with those franks you still had, and a cinnamon stick hanging rack. Notice the artichoke chandelier. I love the artichoke chandelier. This private getaway offers peace and solitude in the garden setting with an outside bedroom concealed with mossed over vines. Music wafts through the air from the gramophone as fairy guests enjoy paradise. Breakfast is served in bed according to this designer. Now we get to the bathrooms. I would say fairy bathrooms are somewhat like Lexington's bathrooms and all our new McMansions now. These are very elaborate bathrooms. Beth Pomeroy offsets her earth tones with accents from the seashore in her bathroom. After all, shells make great bathtubs for diminutive fairies. This fairy house bathroom uses many natural dried ingredients. You see the calendar on the wall and the lid on the toilet?
There's your moss.
Yeah, and there's moss.
I like it.
Yeah, there it is. Is this 87?
Not too old.
Yeah,
we're
it's
okay.
88.
Oh, we're on 88. Notice the handmade toilet paper rolls and the Shoel toilet lids. You can make fairy houses for many different occasions. Here's Valentine's Day. Look at this wedding scene. Moss lines the aisle. See that wedding cake and the presents? Think of this as a centerpiece for that bridal shower. Our advice to the novice fairy architect is this: start by thinking small, think easy. Fairy houses are made from your imagination. Start with a tree stump, an old teapot. You can add twigs, bark, flowers, rocks, shells, pots, nuts, feathers. If you have a bird cage, that's great, but most of us don't have a bird cage around. Use the buttons in your button box and bows. Let yourself go. See a dried flower as a work of art to be hung on the fairy's wall. Imagine a colorful leaf as a snuggly blanket. What? Oh, we missed that one. Okay. Okay, skip that. This is stuff that you can use. That's from the new one. This is stuff that you can throw into a fairy house. Sorry, insert a new slide here.
Beads, jewelry.
This is all stuff from, yeah, but that I had lying around. That I just threw that you could easily do. The little baby duck, the beads and so forth, all that can be used in a fairy house. You can just play with it. Okay. So that is the European coins. Peter has a whole box of European coins. What are we going to do with them? You can't use them anymore. Okay. Now you need to build your structure using twine and a glue gun, unless you're planning to use a conch shell or a dried out squash. Here you can see that she had the ladder and she glued it all. And the ones we recently saw in Connecticut, they used a lot of glue. Now see the dried flower as a work of art to be hung on the fairy's wall. Imagine a colorful leaf as a snuggly blanket. Use little bits of cloth, buttons, marbles, beads, or jewelry. You know that one earring and you can't find the matching one? Almost anything can be something else with a little imagination and careful manipulation. Look at the flag rug. To be sure it's rainproof, you can weatherproof your creation by spraying it with a clear coat of polyurethane from a craft or hardware store. This is one that we just saw that just is in the new book. Go back to that one if you can for a sec. Can you go back? There we go. This is in the new book that has not gone to press yet, but anyway, and she's done each one of these and they all have a point, which I think is wonderful. You can your fairy house with battery powered fairy lights for nighttime imagination, which many of the people are now doing in their newer houses. Okay. And when Goodreads reviewed this book, they said, if you have a garden, you will feel like creating a special place for fairies in it and won't need anything that nature can provide. Should your building skills or your own imagination be lacking, never worry, just make a tiny door leading to a tree trunk or into a bush, and the magic of the fairies will change the way you see and perceive your garden.
I'm doing them again.
There we go. And there's the footsteps going. And that's it, right? And I think that is the end. Thank you. So, questions? It's nice to know so many people in the audience. Amazing. Any questions that I can help with? Spell out cyanoacetate again, huh?
I was gonna say, the type of glue that will hold up.
They said cyanoacetate, C-Y-A-N-O acetate. I would also ask, since we have many garden people from the garden club here, Leslie Masson, who was making those, or Cynthia, Chris Kochansky makes those glass.
Yeah.
Because they are trying to keep the glass staying together in the hot sun. So they may have even a newer glue than this was. Because this book was written several years ago. Other questions?
I just want to make a comment. Next year in the garden club on a Wednesday, we're going to have a talk from the children's garden at the Coastal Maine Botanic Garden.
Yes.
So you will see some of
Some of this?
that they have up there. That would be I forget which month it is.
But that's Wednesday's
Yeah,
workshop, so you have to.
No,
have
that'd be the
meeting
main
on
garden.
it.
It's the big club.
Oh, the
where-
big one.
Where the public is invited,
Oh, okay.
and we'll have she'll either come in person or do it.
Louder,
by Zoom.
Kitty, louder.
The speaker will either come in person down from me, or will speak via Zoom, we don't know yet, but it will
Okay.
be all about the children's garden and how they put it together and designed it,
Yeah.
and we'll include some of these elements. I think.
Yeah, they have a fairy garden up there.
Yeah,
Which is great, good. They also have, if you haven't gone to the main botanical garden, they have these great from, where was it from? Iceland, Peter? Denmark. Great ghouls.
there?
Yes, they're gonna be there for, they're gonna dissolve there. They spent about $1 million for each one of them.
$250,000 each.
Two. Yeah, they're really fantastic. They're great, big, tall, kind of monster-y things. You make lovely cards with and so forth. It's really fun. But the main botanical gardens, if you go up, I found I got exhausted, especially when it's hot. Plan, give yourself a bunch of time, because it's a lot of walking.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I'm